And welcome to another amazing episode of Retrovaniacs. In fact, our 1-year anniversary. This is our 25th show. I'm very excited that we've made it a year. It's actually about 24 shows more than I expected when we started this. And so, as always, I am Jerry Parmentier, and here is Billy Holiday.
Hello there.
And Jeremy Gregory.
Hey, guys.
And I have to say, actually, not only is this our 1-year anniversary podcast, we have all been on every episode. None of us have missed an episode. I mean, the fact that we do it every 2 weeks makes it easier to schedule, but it's still pretty impressive. I listen to plenty of podcasts where it seems 3 episodes in, they lose a member for here and there, and we've been pretty consistent. So pat on the back to us for being consistent and have nothing else to do.
Well, there are certainly shows that I would not want to be here for. The Bayou Billy episode comes to mind, but... yeah, we have stuck it out. All 3 of us have been here through disease and various holidays and everything, so good on us.
And you know what? It wasn't always easy.
No.
Usually, if I heard that a childhood favorite of Jeremy P's was up next, I started to get a scratchy throat, runny nose, and I thought maybe this is a good one to lay out. But you know what? I stuck it through, and I'm glad I did.
All right, you picked 10 bad games.
It's made us stronger, I think.
I still think I've only really picked 2 that were that bad, but that's okay, because you can go back and listen to the previous 24 to see exactly how many I picked that were bad. Spoilers, it's all of them. So, but it's not intentional. I don't try to pick bad games on purpose. But before we even bother talking about that, or this week's game, our 25th game, Billy, what have you been playing since last time? I'm going to just assume you're going to tell me Dark Souls 3, and I'm going to turn the microphone off.
I am. I'm playing it. I'm playing a lot of it. Doing all right, I guess. I think I'm about 3/4 of the way through. I've put about 50 hours into it. In typical Dark Souls fashion, I have seen the "you've died" screen more than I have anything else. But I'm plugging along, and I found out that I made the mistake I usually do on these games. I get more than halfway through the game before I find out I have made a pretty worthless build as far as my character goes, with no real strengths to speak of. And then I just spend the rest of the game just trying to play through because it's beyond the point of starting over again. So I've been playing that a lot. I don't want to quite admit how much because some people here might be sensitive to the subject. But yeah, I mean it's good, and I haven't gotten time to play much of anything else. I did spend a couple hours with the Twilight Princess, that HD remake over on the Wii U. I figure it's my only Zelda game I'm going to be playing in the next 4 or 5 years, so I might as well dig in and give that one a go. But that's about it for me.
Now, did you play that before on the original version?
Twilight Princess?
Yeah, Twilight Princess.
Yeah, I played it through and highly enjoyed it. And I was more excited about this than the Wind Waker remake, which I wasn't excited about because I didn't want to do the whole navigating, changing the direction of the winds, which they fixed. It's much better. But this Twilight Princess, they've got it looking real sharp, and it's definitely worth playing through again. My
only memories of Twilight Princess, I did finish it. It was the only game I bought on my Wii U at first, or my original Wii at first. Mm-hmm. But I remember the beginning took a while to get really into it. Like when you're in the starting village, and then you go through the first transformation, I guess, and it took like 6 hours to feel like I was actually playing a Zelda game.
Yeah, it's. I mean, because you're not even in the the green attire early on. You're in the blue, and it's just a very prolonged. It's basically a tutorial, but just a very prolonged one on how to do every single thing, which you've played a previous Zelda game, you already know how to do. So yeah, I mean, a pretty overinflated tutorial, but once you get through that, pretty solid game.
Do you have to use the Wiimote and nunchuck to do all the waggling, or did they cut that out?
That they cut that. I don't know. Maybe the option's there. I've been using the gamepad, the the Wii U pad, all exclusively, which was one of the things I was excited about because they kind of went overboard with the motion controls on that one. But yeah, excellent with the gamepad.
Well, it's one I definitely want to pick up at some point. I also was not excited about Wind Waker, but I ended up getting it for free with one of the old Club Nintendo promotions. So I did play through it, and it was better than I remember. And Twilight Princess is one I do remember favorably, but I just remember that it was one that took a while for me to really get into. But once I was in, I was fully in.
Oh yeah.
And since now, you as you brought up, the next Zelda won't show up until 2019. We have some time. And I'll probably play it again. Well, I don't have Dark Souls 3 because still, unsurprisingly, throughout a year of episodes, I still don't have a PS4. Although I do believe I will have one fairly soon, which means that the new PS4 will release the day afterwards, and there will be a major price cut. That's how things work for me. But I am going back now, and I'm playing Dark Souls 1 along with a podcast that goes through the Dark Souls games. And it's actually fun to play through it this way because I already played it before and beaten it. So now I'm going through and playing a high magic build as opposed to before it was just sword and shield the whole way with a few healing spells or support spells. But now I'm playing pretty much exclusively a glass cannon that's going to blow things up, but if you hit me once, I die. And so I'm listening to this other podcast. It's hold on one second. I'll edit this out.
Bonfire Side Chat.
Bonfire Side Chat. Thank you very much. It's excellent. And I'm listening to every episode as I play through it, and if I'm at an area that they have not hit yet, or if they're in an area I haven't hit yet, I stop listening, play through to get to those areas, and I'm going back through it.
We need to do that for Bayou Billy, maybe.
Ooh, the Bayou Billy cast. That's going to be huge. People are going to be way into that. It's just three guys crying.
Bayou Side Chat.
Just a fire of Bayou Billy cartridges. It'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, I've been doing that, and again, I finally got a working copy of Persona 3, so I'm playing through that, which I'm enjoying. It's not as good as 4, but I do like it. I see where a lot of the ideas where I liked a lot in 4 came from, I guess, and were refined. But it's very good. I'm enjoying it a lot. But I spent a lot of time on this week's game because it's a longer game for us. But Jeremy, what have you been playing since last time?
I actually picked up Uncharted 4. And
oh, yeah.
I think you guys are the Uncharted series, and I'm a pretty big fan of it myself. I actually beat the Uncharted collection that came out with a lot of PlayStation 4s not too long ago. Played through all 3 of those, just remembered how much I loved those games, and of course bought Uncharted 4, pre-ordered it, and was looking forward to it. And that game does not disappoint. That is one of the best. I think it is already. I think about like 3/4 of the way through. It is my favorite Uncharted game ever.
Oh, better than 2.
Oh my God, it is. It's really, really good. So many things about that game that have been improved over the originals. One of the biggest things that really surprised me just how great it is the new stealth mechanic. And it's not anything you actually have to do. I don't think there's really any sort of where you have to use stealth in any of these levels, but it gives you that option, and it works so much better than any of the previous Uncharted games. Before, it was just kind of like you sneak up on a guy, snap his neck, and hope nobody else sees you. This one actually kind of introduces some stealth mechanics where you can see when other people notice you. You can see, it'll turn yellow when they see you, and they'll kind of go hunting for you, and it'll turn orange or red whenever they actually do see you and will start attacking you. And usually that's not my cup of tea. I think I've mentioned several times in this podcast where I just don't like stealth sections. But this game does it so well that I actually find myself restarting checkpoints if somebody notices me, because it's so much fun to just kind of sneak around these different areas and actions settings and really kind of act like a thief. Nate, to me, has always just kind of been this murderous guy on a rampage, just killing people constantly. And in this game, he actually, it actually lets you play like a stealthy thief, what he's supposed to be. And I really appreciate that. And it really, it makes a lot of those sections a lot more fun, especially the ones kind of halfway through the game where it even opens up and becomes almost this open world kind of game where you're in a Jeep. You can go around to these different spots, and check things out and really, attack something like you would if you were, kind of like in Far Cry, if you played Far Cry before, like Far Cry 3 or 4 or whatever. You can scout these places out, go in, take people out completely unnoticed. And it's so much fun that it has won me over as so far my favorite Uncharted game. I still got, I think, about maybe a fourth of the game to go. But so far, this is the Uncharted game to play. If you've not played it and you like Uncharted, this is it. This is the game you have to play.
We're gonna make a stealth man out of you yet.
Oh God, I wish every game was this much fun in stealth. It's forgiving, but it's still it's suspenseful. It makes you be careful with what you're doing, but it's just forgiving enough that you can really run around these stages and have a lot of fun being a silent piece of shit and just running around snapping people's necks, jumping on top of them, before anybody notices you, and then hiding in the tall grass. So that's really what I've been playing. I can't recommend it enough. If you're an Uncharted fan, you gotta play it. It's really great.
Well, this week's game has no stealth in it whatsoever, and that's all right because we visit the N64 classic, Banjo-Kazooie.
Uh-huh.
Now, you use the term classic pretty much every episode.
Yes, they're all classics because this is a classic retro gaming podcast. So by definition,
they're retro games, they're old games, but they're not usually classics. But I think no matter what's said about this game, it cannot be denied. This is certainly a classic title, perhaps more deserving of it than anything we have played yet, barring perhaps Mansion of Hidden Souls. But this is one that Jeremy Gregory has lobbied hard for. He kind of earmarked this one as being, what should be our anniversary episode, and I can see why. It's the longest game we've played yet, the most in depth, certainly the most finished looking game we've played yet, and it's a real classic with an actual fan base, and there's not just 3 or 4 people when we mention the name of it saying, I think I recall that one.
Yeah, this was definitely one of my picks, especially after I played it again on the rare replay for Xbox One. Mm-hmm. And playing that really just it reminded me just how fun this game was. And back when it first came out, this was kind of a big tentpole release for the Nintendo 64 because back then there wasn't really that many big tentpole releases for the Nintendo 64 that weren't Nintendo games. So a lot of the magazines were really hyping up Banjo-Kazooie because this was going to be the second coming of Mario 64. And you look at the screens and this game looked amazing. I mean, it's a very, very detailed looking world to it. The characters look great. It's definitely not the simple looking game that Mario 64 was. Great lighting, great stages, huge stages. And everyone was just super excited about it. And I got this game day one, and I was not disappointed. So I was really hoping to see just how well this game holds up over time, and just to see what you guys would think of it, because I think you are the only 2 people left on Earth that never played Banjo-Kazooie.
Oh, I didn't know that Billy had not played Banjo-Kazooie. I thought I was the only person who had not played Banjo-Kazooie, which made no sense since I worked in a video game retail store at the time that this came out, and it was huge. And you just brought up that it was really pushed as the next big title on Nintendo. It was, not a Nintendo release, but it did look from screenshots like, okay, someone took Mario 64 and they put a bear in it. I'm good. I've already played that game. And at this point in time, we had talked about before in the switch to the 32-bit, 64-bit era of PlayStation, Saturn, and the N64, that the PlayStation really was the much more successful of the three systems, and it was pushing older games. So the same time this would have come out, I think you'd also see Metal Gear Solid or any of the other games on the PlayStation that would have been more what I would have been interested at that time. I would have seen a game that looks like Mario 64 with a cartoon bear. I'm not interested. I'm no longer, even though everyone says how great it is, I'm like, yeah, but I've played a million games like that. I'm going to play this other game that coincidentally have a lot of stealth in it that I really wanted to play. So I never played this because it looked to me at the time like another Mario 64. And I think, as I said in one of our previous episodes, embarrassingly, my truth is I don't really like Mario 64. I think it's fine, but I don't enjoy it. I don't think it's as polished as a 2D Mario. So I've never finished Mario 64. I've never been that interested in a game like that in the Mario style until they really refined 3D to where it is now. The early 3D stuff I was not a fan of. So I had never played this before at all. So I'm surprised that Billy also has not played it before.
I had played just a little bit. I had a friend who had this one. And, I went over one night and I played it just for a few minutes, not really too in-depth. And yeah, it just struck me as, this is very much Mario 64-like. I've got Mario 64 at home. This seems decent enough, but I don't really see any point in running out to buy this one. And aside from that, maybe, half hour I kind of messed around on there at my friend's house years ago. I hadn't picked it up until I picked up the rare replay and kind of got started on that.
Well, you're both insane because Super Mario 64 is one of my favorite games ever, and all I wanted was another really good Mario 64 game. Because after Mario 64 came out, you had a lot of kind of really shitty Mario 64 clones that came out. And nothing really ever even came close to how good Mario 64 was. And seeing this game and the fact that it was rare, we all had Donkey Kong Country and all that stuff before us. You knew it was at least going to be competent. And so that was the big reason why I was really looking forward to this, because I was like, if they could just make a really decent Mario 64 clone, I would be super excited. And they did, and I think they went above and beyond, even to its detriment sometimes. They made a great Mario 64 clone with a lot more added to it.
Yeah, I'd say it well surpasses being a clone. So in order to explain the difference, really, so Mario 64 is a fully 3D platformer, but it's Mario, so you can run and you can jump. And instead of being on a 2D platform like the classic Marios we've all seen before, this one was fully 3D. You were behind Mario most of the time. It made, in my opinion, a lot of the camera in Mario 64 and some of the jumps, because you had to actually also pick a direction as opposed to just making sure you jump far enough, made it very difficult. I didn't think the depth was as clearly labeled, or not labeled, but as clearly defined as it should have been in Mario 64. This game had much better textures on everything, so I think that helped a lot. The camera was a little bit better, but I think more importantly, it wasn't just go through a level and get to the end. And Mario 64 had level objectives as well, but this one really took having other things to do in the level other than just get from the start to the end of the level. Was a huge part of this game. I think that was why this game made it, when we were playing it through this time, for me, much more interesting. Every level had, aside from just collect all the doobies and get to the end of the level, in order to collect the doobies, you had almost like side quests in every level, optional, for the most part optional, tasks you could take that may not have made any sense as far as a 3D platformer goes. To one of the ones in one of the levels is to play kind of like Simon with turtles. If you don't know what Simon is, I'm sorry, but it's a copying game, but you play with colored turtles, and that's the kind of stuff I really enjoy in games like this. So I was actually very impressed with this game because it does so much more than just be a 3D platformer.
Yeah, and I will say my biggest praise for this is just the overall look of it. And it's a fun game, and no matter what complaints I might have as we go along, the fun factor from it, I think some things, it takes a hit, but it never goes away. And yeah, I like the, in Mario 64, you usually had your 1 star at the end. If you made it kind of to where the into that level sort of was. And after that, they give you a hint about what needed to be done next to get the next one. Yeah, I liked how they just kind of dropped you in these these big levels, these big expansive levels, and they vary greatly. And so many of them are so much fun, so nice looking. From Treasure Cove, which is kind of a beach, to you got a haunted type mansion thrown in there. Just so much different stuff to look at, and you just kind of discover as you go along. And it's random things. It's things that you don't think would yield anything, all of a sudden do. And it's just a lot of fun to kind of explore, and you're not really pressured to reach any goal in any amount of time. However, I will say this: I prefer that Mario 64 camera. I had immense trouble with the camera in this one.
Well, I mean, before we get into shitting on that camera, because that's what we're going to do, I will say one of the things about Super Mario 64 that I enjoyed far more in Banjo-Kazooie is, I mean, I think everyone knows that Mario 64 is a masterful game. It's one of the greatest games ever made, despite what Jeremy P thinks. It is, it defined a genre for what a 3D platformer is. And, I mean, what Billy was talking about, it rings so true for this game, because it is, for as much of a clone as it is of Super Mario 64, it has its own identity just because of how open it is. Now, in the first world that you go to in Super Mario 64, which is, I forget its name, but, it's a very, it's got that big mountain you climb. The first star you have to get in that game is basically traversing that world, going all the way up that mountain, and then fighting a boss. And in that time, you have seen basically everything that level has to offer. And after that star, it breaks it down into just kind of going into different parts of that world and finding the subsequent stars that you need to find. Banjo-Kazooie is not like that at all. I mean, it just drops you into these large worlds with just the tiniest bit of a hint as to what you need to do to get these jiggies. Some of them are just, they're hidden randomly in the level that you can just jump to. Other ones you have to do very specific things to make them appear. And it is incredibly obtuse sometimes as to what it wants you to do. Sometimes to a very big fault. And again, it's one of the biggest problems in the game is just some of the random shit you have to do to find these different jiggies. But overall, I think it was very... It felt like it was you had much more freedom in Banjo-Kazooie and exploration and what you did, just because of how it dropped you in these levels and how open they were. And that was one of my favorite things about this game, and it still is.
We seem to have gotten ahead of ourselves again, assuming that people at least have some idea of what the game is, and we really haven't explained it very well. So, Banjo-Kazooie is, again, a 3D platformer. You are Banjo, a bear, and your friend Kazooie is a bird that rides around in your backpack and will later on allow you to do some extra things you couldn't do if you were just a giant cartoon bear. And you're going around collecting jiggies, which look like golden puzzle pieces, in order to eventually get to the top of a witch's castle named Gruntilda, who has stolen your sister in order to steal her youth and beauty to become a much younger, more beautiful witch. And that's the story. It's not very exciting, but it doesn't need to be. Again, these kind of games, do you need a story? I'm going to rescue the princess. I'm going to save the world. I'm going to save my sister. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is a major collect-a-thon. The whole point of this game is to collect as many jiggies, these golden puzzle pieces, as you can, along with several other collectibles throughout the levels. And much like Mario 64, there is a hub world, essentially. You're in Gruntilda's lair, which is, you start out It's actually right above where you live as the bear. You climb up on the mountain. There's a witch's face. You climb to the witch's face, and there you are in your hub world. This will lead you to all the other worlds in the game. Much like Mario 64, where you had to have so many stars to open each door. In this game, the collectible to open doors is notes, musical notes. There are, in each of the, there's 9 worlds outside of the hub world, and each world has 10 of the Jiggy puzzle pieces and 100 notes to find. And, you know, in this kind of game, and I don't know if you guys do the same thing I do, but I assume you do, if I know there's a specific number of collectibles, it's almost a given. Even before they had achievements and stuff that's in every game now, I was going to get every one of those things.
Oh yeah, that's that. I have that to such a great fault. It's caused me so much grief over the years in video games. Anytime I know there's something to be collected, I compulsively have to, and it almost ends the same way. I'm right down to it. I'm missing a few. Either, you know, it was back before I could just look online to see where they are, or it's just something that I have deemed almost impossible to pull off, and just out of pure anger, I quit and I never pick it up again. So yeah, I mean, I love collecting things in games, but it just it gets me awful anxious.
I mean, I'm like that to a point. Like, I really want to collect all of the stuff that's in a level, but I know at some point I just get to the point in the level where if I'm really having trouble getting something and I know I can move on, I'll just move on, and maybe later I'll come back to it or something. But it's always fun to collect this stuff up to the point where it's not fun to collect this stuff. And for Banjo-Kazooie, I think the first 3 or 4 levels are really fun to collect that stuff, and then after that, I just really stopped caring. It doesn't get to my, that weird ADD point where I feel like I have to collect everything to move on. So it really doesn't quite bother me, I think, as bad as you guys do, but I still really like to collect all that stuff.
I definitely do. I think there's definitely a point where I will say this is too much to do, too much to collect, too much to see everything, and I will either decide it's not worth my time and move on from, not the game, but the process of collecting everything. Or sometimes, like you said, I'll go forward and then come back later and finish it. In this case, I think it's because the numbers are obtainable. They don't seem offensively large. To know that there's essentially 10 quests in every world, and then 100 of these little notes that are, some of them are very obvious. They're all over the ground in front of you when you walk into the level, and some of them are way high up on ledges. You can only see if you're, a certain in a certain mode. It's definitely a lot of things to collect, but it's not offensive. So I never at any point thought I'm not going to collect all these things. Instead, I would get down to, in some levels, okay, I've got 98 of these musical notes. The last 2 I don't have, but I know I'm missing something. And there's several places, and we'll get into this later when we go through the levels real quick, but there were a few things I don't know how I ever would have figured out on my own. Since we are playing this for the purpose of a podcast, I would go through the levels and do everything I could find. And for, all these 9 worlds, I'd say 7 out of 9, I got through them 100% with no extra help. And then there were at least two examples where I thought, how would I have ever figured this out on my own? How would I have done this before the internet? How would I have known in any way what to do? And we'll get to that when we get to the levels and the other moves you get. But the other part I liked with the way this game was laid out was, as you go through the worlds, which are, because you have to have so many musical notes to open the doors to get to the next world, it really did control what order you went through these 9 worlds. But it would unlock moves for you that would make sense in each level, where that was kind of like the level was also a tutorial for that new move that you would be assumed you're going to use through the rest of the game. But it wasn't. I don't think it made it so that it wasn't like they show you this move and then you realize when you play it through the second time you could have done this the whole time. You can't do that move till you learn it.
Right.
Which I do like, because it made me feel like you could get everything at every level before you moved on. You didn't have to assume you're going to go back to the first world at the very end when you've learned that last move. There's only really one area in the game where you have to do that. The rest of the time, if you're in a world, you can earn everything in it. There's nothing that's going to hold you back from doing that other than your own time and interest.
Yeah, and I think the hub world actually uses those, being able to come back from like when you first started and get things from back then with the new stuff you learn. That does that way more than the actual stages do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and for a hub world, that's okay. Like that I assume, and it's a fairly small world when you really look at the size of it compared to the specific game levels that would have the 10 puzzle pieces in it. So I didn't mind that, but yeah, it was almost like it was gates. It was like a Metroidvania style thing where you can see that ledge before, but you can't jump to it yet because you're missing this move that lets you jump higher. That doesn't seem bad to me at all, especially when you use that for a hub world that takes you to these other areas. But I really don't like when you have to go back to an old map altogether that is out of the way and you've already done most of the world in just to get like 2 collectible pieces on top of a mountain. And there's not anything like that in the game except for that race.
What did you guys think of that hub world? Like, what did you really think of it?
I thought that hub world was god awful. I think it took Mario 64, and I hate this. May as well be the Banjo-Kazooie / Mario 64 praise podcast episode, but that hub world, Mario 64, you had a castle, and the castle maintained like a sense of being this huge, castle, a little outdoor area, basement area. But if I wanted to get somewhere, and I was at the front of that castle, I could get there pretty quick, no matter where it is. Even if I have to go outside, even if I have to go down in the basement area. Shit, it takes you a little bit of time if you want to go back. Or if you're at the front of the hub world and you want to advance forward, it takes a while, and there's a lot of jumps. Sometimes there's these jumps you have to make. There's an enemy or two around there. It's just, I don't mind it being big, but it's more of a straight line than it is scattered around everywhere. And several times I just forgot where the hell to go, and especially when you unlock an area. You don't necessarily enter that area right from where you unlock it. And I spent several minutes on more than one occasion trying to find just where the entrance to this level was.
I think it's a little hard to figure out the hub world. I didn't hate it. I don't think it was too big, and I didn't mind the backtracking. I kind of liked that it was... once you knew how it was laid out, it made sense. But the first time I went through a lot of areas, I was just lost. I was confused on where to go next. Especially when you get to the area that has the later hub worlds or the later other worlds. There's like a snow world and a desert world. Mm-hmm. That area from there's like a ledge that goes up around the side of that cave. I never saw that damn thing. I found it by accident. And I don't know if that's just a fault of the graphical abilities of the N64 at that time. But I just did not see something that should have been very obvious to go along. But there was just a lot of that hub world that was a little bit confusing, but once you learned how it was all laid out, I didn't mind that it was like that. Because again, I thought of it more of a Metroid feel, where it was you can see everything from the get-go, you just might not be able to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gets to that point where you will memorize it, but it has a problem of just being too crazy for its own good, for how labyrinthine that fucking hub world is. It goes all over the place. And a lot of times it doesn't make sense. And one of the biggest problems is exactly what Billy said, where you will open up a world and it'll show a little cutscene showing the room where you need to be in. And it'll be like, all right, here's where you need to go. This is where the level is.
Yeah, and take into account when you get this cutscene of where the level is, more than likely this is an area you haven't seen yet.
You've never seen. So you're just like, what? Okay, where do I go? Where's this fucking thing at? I've never seen this. And then it's up to you to figure out where it is. And for me back then, I was fine with it because I really liked exploring this weird, crazy hub world. But now, when I was playing it again, it really bothered me because it was too obtuse for its own good a lot of times. With just how many unlockables were in there, how many weird warp zones were around, how many weird little hidden places there were. I never really felt like there was a guiding line to where you needed to go. And that really bothered me this time because it took me so long to finally just get the hang of where I needed to go in that hub world this time. And I wish there was just more of a direct line of to go to the stages if you wanted to, and then maybe here's these other areas that you can explore and find some other stuff if you wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of ways they could have fixed it, but I mean, it's a little too late for that now. It's just, I don't know what they were trying to do. I don't know if they were trying to just give you a place where you could try out some of the stuff you had just unlocked. I don't know if it's more of a hub world slash training ground of sorts, but it's just a bit much, especially when you're trying like I was, and you're more than halfway through, and you're just trying to get through it at this point. But who else thought, and maybe it's just me, that some of the facts that Brentilda, who is the good sister of your main enemy of the game, she gives you these random facts about her sister that come into play later on. Some of those, for some reason, and it may be because it was late and I was intoxicated on many occasions while playing it. Some of these were just hilarious. I recall one that it's a fun fact that she washes her hair with baked beans, and I was rendered useless for several minutes. And the other one, I think the one that really got me, was that she gets her clothes from the trash can.
Yeah, her favorite place to sleep is a fresh garbage bin or something like that. Yeah, it was all as you go through the labyrinth hub world, you'll find her sister will be hidden like around a corner or in off on the side, and you'll go up to her and talk, and she'll tell you up to 3 facts about her sister, but the facts are almost like the dumbest 3-year-old's jokes would be, like, oh, my favorite food is fart sauce, and you're like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But
exactly,
I laughed at it every
humor,
time. I know it's funny in its dumbness. Like, it was just, okay, that's really dumb. Like, her favorite color is dung brown. Like, what? Who would ever say dung brown? But those are the facts you pick up, and of course, because it's a video game, you know that they're telling you these things for a reason. They can't just tell you them for no reason. So I'm sure we'll get to why that happens at some point if we haven't decided early that we're just done talking about this game. But before we even get to why that's useful, let's go over, because the worlds are, much like a lot of 3D and 2D platformers, all the worlds are very unique. I don't think you're going to see 2 worlds that really look very similar. I like that they're all very different looking, and therefore have different mechanics in some levels. I mean, at least a twist on their mechanics. Not really truly different mechanics, but a twist on them. So the first world after the hub world you go to is Mumbo's Mountain, and that's a pretty standard, 3D grassland with a mountain in the middle. Nothing groundbreaking, but it's a good introduction to the game, a good introduction to show you how the levels are going to be set up, that you have to find these little collectibles everywhere, and these guys that you may be running into may be monsters, or maybe they're people that are supposed to help you, or maybe they're both. There's a lot of characters that talk, and because it's an N64 game, they don't really talk. I mean, there's text at the bottom of the screen, but everything goes wop 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 wop, which is in 2016 kind of funny to see. It's not something. It was a very short-lived phenomena. I think you went from having no sound at all and just text boxes to people talking to you in a pretty short window of time. But the N64, because it was not a CD system, had a lot of wop 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 wop. So it was good to see that. But it was also how many different people talked, and yet they all had very different voices.
Yeah, I mean, it gave them a lot of character. It was kind of like the Star Fox characters. They all kind of had weird, weird gibbery jabby kind of voices to them. But in Banjo-Kazooie, everyone had like a different sound effect pitched at different levels. And the one I remember most is the hippopotamus in the beach. He's just burping constantly. Yes. And I remember as a kid, I like Billy, I was rendered. I could not fucking move just because of how much I was laughing at that dude just constantly burping over and over. And so many of the characters in the game that you talk to, they've all got their different sound effect that they use. I think it really gives a lot of character to these characters that otherwise really aren't that interesting at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the only things these characters have going for them in some cases. But I'll tell you, there's a couple of instances where, instead of the noise they make being, being funny or anything like that. That I can't remember what the animal is. It's that crying ass over on the Treasure Cove stage who has lost his treasure, and he just sobs and sobs. Anytime you're within any range of him, he's sobbing, and it never ends. And I only encountered that a couple times where they were more grating than anything, and I almost chose on purpose not to help him out.
I don't want that puzzle piece. I don't care enough to do whatever your silly ass task is, just to not hear you talk. But the other thing that Mumbo's Mountain is good for showing you is the different pickups and what they do. It starts out along with the notes and the puzzle pieces that are the quest items. You'll pick up silver skulls that rotate around. You use these silver skulls and Mumbo's. Let me try this again. Use those silver skulls to trade to Mumbo. Mumbo is a shaman who lives in several of the stages in the game. When you get to his shack, it looks like a big skull. You go inside, he'll have a number of skulls he'll take, and once you give him that number of skulls, he will give you a transformation that changes from what you are, which is just a bear with a bird on your back, to something else. And in that first level, I don't remember what the thing was. Was it a spider?
Spider,
it turns you into a spider in the first level, and that allows you to climb around pretty easily on areas that normally your bear would slide down the wall. But also there's an area that is like an anthill that's in the middle of the map, and if you're not the spider, you can't get to the higher parts of that mountain to get that puzzle piece. Again, it's not a requirement, but it's kind of a neat ability. I like that you change your form completely and get other abilities. I like that in a lot of games, and I think it was done pretty well in this game. That the levels that they gave you that because it's a self-contained level, it's not that you're supposed to take that transformation and wander out into the world. So it was very contained. If you get that transformation, there's going to be areas you're going to use it immediately around you, and that's it. And I like that.
I mean, it's really cool that they did that. But I don't think the things you change into ever really do much more than just change their appearance. The ant that you can turn into in one of the stages does basically the same thing as the spider or whatever it is. Nothing ever really gives you any significant different type of gameplay. It's just like, okay, here you change into this thing and you can go to this area now, but you're basically just jumping. You're never really changing up the gameplay any. Later on, there's a swamp area where you get to turn into a small crocodile. And so I was like, well, that's cool. What are we going to do with you get to be a small crocodile. And nothing really changes. You're just a crocodile that moves around a little bit faster, and you can do the things that the game wants you to do as the small crocodile. It doesn't really change anything too much. I just kind of wish they would have done a little bit more with those transformations.
Yeah, I mean, it just the transformation. I think I like the transformations. I think it was well done in terms of you transform into like Jeremy P was saying, you transform in this thing, and in the nearby vicinity you're going to need it. They're not making you transform and then you have to cross the hub world to get somewhere else to use it. But yeah, like Jeremy was saying, it would be nice to see that kind of expand. I think they've got a good base, but it would have been nice to see that expanded on. The things you transform into pretty much you could have just jumped into a vehicle and done the same. It changes the way you move around the level. It's like a different mode of transportation. It would have been nice to see maybe like some unique attacks in each form and things like that. But yeah, I mean, they had the start of something good, and I can't complain too much. If anything, I'm saying that I enjoyed it and would like to have seen more of it.
Well, the other collectible that you learn about in Mumbo's Mountain level is the eggs. You'll find blue eggs all over the map, and eggs serve two purposes. You can shoot them forward like a projectile, or something that I found to be incredibly useless is you will squat down and the bird will basically shit eggs out of the back of you that bounce behind you.
You might as well say they serve one purpose.
Well, they serve. Let's. I'll get to that in a second, but I want to say, if there is a puzzle in the game that I couldn't figure out, the answer was shit an egg at it. And there was plenty of puzzles in the game where or things that I couldn't figure out. That as a last-ditch effort after just getting frustrated, I would shit an egg and it would work, and it would make me laugh every time because it would just be this doesn't make any sense, but it's become they were like, here, we programmed this cool move, and they're like, what the hell can we do with it? And they had one idea, and they're like, well, we got to do something else with it. So they added these other things in that only shitting an egg will matter on, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And there's an area in the hub world where there are a few webbed areas covered with spider webs. And you're supposed to clearly break them because there's things behind them or under them, and you can see them, so you know you're supposed to break them. And I decided, I'm going to break these spider webs. So I would jump up and down on them and slam down on them, which is a move you learn, maybe even in the first level, where you slam down really hard from a jump and do damage to things. No, that didn't break the spider web. And then you have a move where you can charge forward. I hit that spider with that. I did everything I could think of, and finally I was like, wait a minute. And so you shit an egg, and I literally you bend over, and an egg kind of flops out of the backpack backwards and bounces along, and like if you just gently tossed an egg behind you. And yet somehow that destroys spider webs. It's every puzzle in the game I couldn't figure out. The answer was shit an egg at it every time.
That's good advice for life in general.
It really is. Well, the first item that happened like that I actually had to look up online what to do was in the next world, which is Treasure Trove Cove, which was already mentioned. It's a pirate beach area. It's got a pirate ship in the middle of the map. It's where you learn how to swim, which is arguably the least enjoyable part of the game is swimming.
Oh yeah.
But you're not really. I mean, swimming in Treasure Trove Cove is more of a necessity to escape things. It's not like they want you to swim a lot. It's kind of like, yeah, you need to swim if you miss some jumps. There's a couple areas you need to swim to underwater, but generally it's more of it's supposed to kind of seem hard to swim, so don't fall in the water. Treasure Trove Cove introduces the red feathers, which allow you to fly if you go to the right. There's like a launch pad that if your character stands on and you have red feathers, you'll shoot up in the air and you can fly around, which will make it easy to get to some other platforms you otherwise could not reach. That's the one where there's a section in one of the puzzles where there is a bucket. And the bucket is on the side of this cliff, and you walk over to the bucket, and it says, "Oh, I'm a bucket, and I'm very sad because I have a hole. I need something I'm looking for pebbles to plug up my hole." Now, this is a game that has collections for everything. I could probably have worded that better, but that's how the game words it. I need pebbles to plug up my holes.
Oh, you got it.
So I easily spent 2 hours scouring the map for pebbles.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I went underwater to all the areas of the level that you're not really supposed to get to, because the downside in this level of trying to swim, aside from that you will run out of breath if you're underwater, is there is a shark that will chase you through half of the level if you're in the water. So I'm essentially letting myself die over and over and over again while I search for these pebbles. And then I went through every cave and every single place in this level to find these damn pebbles, and I finally gave up. And I thought, okay, if I'm only on the second world, I hate to look up online what to do, because this is a game designed for children, and I'm almost 40, and I can't figure out what to do with these pebbles. And my fear was it was going to be, oh yeah, you go to the last world of the game and there's pebbles on the ground, you have to take them back. I hate that stuff, so I didn't want to do that. And thankfully, the answer is you shit an egg into the bucket. You shit an egg into the bucket, and it all of a sudden is like, great, thanks. And then it drains a whole pond for you to unlock the level.
Let me tell you how I discovered that. I was in a similar, it didn't take me hours. I was in a similar situation. They say pebbles. So I proceeded to search around that stage looking, and I couldn't find anything. And I kept, I would speak to that bucket every now and then to see if there's any different dialogue at all. And I shit an egg on him out of an act of disrespect, out of frustration. I was like, I don't know what you want. Have this. And it worked.
And then it worked.
And I was thrilled.
And that happened to me later because I had already given up on. I had already learned. Okay, if you're not sure what to do, just try all your moves by that point. So there were other parts of the game where I just was like, maybe this is what you're supposed to do, and I would shit an egg and things, and it would work, and I would laugh every single time. But that's the lesson, I guess, for this game is if you don't know what to do, shit an egg in it. So
shit an egg.
I mean, it's kind of needless. I mean, you've already got a move where Kazooie can shoot an egg out of her mouth or whatever forward. But then you've also got a move that you can shit an egg, out of her ass or whatever it is. Whatever happens, I don't know. And you turn around and the egg flops out. So it just seems completely needless to have two different things that do essentially the same exact thing. You know, an egg goes forward into something. It seems like that would have just just focus on the thing where you can shoot the egg that solves many other puzzles instead of just this thing that plops out an egg behind you and kind of bounces, you know, just slowly forward. It never made any sense to, even as a kid. I was like, this is dumb. Like, why do you have to fucking do this when I can just shoot an egg, which doesn't work? You can shoot an egg at that bucket and nothing will ever happen. But if you shit an egg on it, there you go. That puzzle solved.
Well, and the other thing, like I said, that Treasure Trove Cove will introduce you to is swimming. And swimming in this game is not as fluid as it, you know, it's not like you're just underwater and so you move a little bit slower like Mario, and you can't, you have an air meter that comes up. You can only last so long underwater until you come up for air. But also your character, you have two ways to propel yourself through the water. One is that the bird will flap its arms behind you, and that does kind of like short or long bursts of straight movement. You don't have a lot of control over where you're headed other than just straight, but you'll go a lot faster. Or you can hold down one of the other buttons, and your bear will kick his feet, which gives you some much more control, but you're incredibly slow. And you kind of use a combination of those two moves to go through the water. I found it not just because of the camera, which is always a problem in a 3D game, especially early 3D games, but just it was hard for me to really pinpoint with accuracy. If I had to aim for like a floating thing in the water, unless it was directly in front of me when I landed in the water, it was very hard for me to kind of get to it half the time. I had to circle around, and when you have an air meter, that becomes very, very frustrating. But thankfully in that world, again, the water's kind of there as a hazard, not really somewhere you're supposed to go unless you're trying to collect all the collectibles in the game. The next world that you unlock, though, if you haven't learned how to swim very well, you're going to learn quick. It's Clanker's Cavern, an underwater kind of a metal shark container that you have to go into and you know, free the shark somewhat, and then you go into this giant metal shark to get some of the puzzle pieces. I'm going to be honest, I completely missed this world until I was almost finished with the game.
Well, I'm going to tell you, you didn't miss much of anything. This was, you know, this game, it's a nice looking game. It's a lot of fun. It made me laugh, but damn, it frustrated the shit out of me sometimes. You know, it's a lot like having I think everyone who has held employment has had that coworker who doesn't do their job quite right. And causes you to have to do a lot of extra work, and it's very frustrating, but they're just so damn nice that you can't say anything, and you just put up with them. And I think that's what I did for the most part with some of the troubles this game has. And we're going to talk about this camera, and we're going to talk about it now, because Mario 64 laid the groundwork for how you do a camera. I still think to this day, games have a hard time doing it as well as that game did. You can't look up. You can't look up with the camera. You know, I first discovered this at the beginning. As soon as I get into the hub world, there's that painting of Gruntilda there. I was like, all right, let's have a look at this painting. And I try to look up. You can't look up. I don't know what it is. This camera. It's one of the worst cameras I've encountered. And it's a shame it's attached to such a good game. It doesn't ruin the game, but they could do better. They know better than this, but Mario 64 has been out. Just copy it. There ain't no shame in it.
I mean, they've done their best to copy Super Mario 64, and I think they succeeded, but they made a game that was a little bit more than what was capable with those Mario 64 camera controls. Yeah. The reason why Mario 64 camera controls worked was because the game was designed around that camera. And it seems like instead of that, in Banjo-Kazooie, they they just kind of thought maybe the camera would hold out. They kind of did what they wanted to do, and they just hoped that camera would be serviceable. And for the most part, I mean, it does. But there are certain parts in this game where this camera completely fails, and one of them is in this level. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's the chain where you have to go down into this. You're trying to get a jiggy that's down there to free this giant metal fish, clanker, and you have to swim down there and swim around this giant chain that's attached the fish to the bottom of the this place that it's in, and you have to do this without dying or running out of time. It's almost impossible because that camera is dog shit. You cannot see where you're going. You cannot see what you're, no matter how many times you press that fucking button to change that camera view, you cannot see what you're doing. So you're just kind of going through it blind to figure it out. And you have to do it so perfectly because even if you kind of fuck up and do it, you're still going to run out of air before you get back up to the top where Clanker is. So you have to be perfect to do this. And that camera will not allow you to do that.
And that was one of the first moments. That's one of the early moments where I remember I just would stop and I was like, oh, it's going to be like this from time to time. As good as this game is, it's going to have. And there are other moments like that. I mean, that's early in the game, and I think it's one of the more frustrating things just because of how demanding it is, and you're working against the limitations of the swimming on there and the camera. Yeah, but I mean, the camera fails you a lot of times over, and I blame that for part of the reason I had such a hard time traversing through the hub world. Is that camera? It is kind of fixed. It's not a fixed camera, but it's a semi-fixed camera. The camera is looking at what it wants you to look at. And if you want to move it, there's a lot of kind of maneuvering around you have to do with your character as well as the stick for the camera. And I was very surprised they did not in case you're going to pick this up and play it on the rare replay, they did not fix that. I figured that would have been something that they would have given a little attention to.
Well, instead there's a button you can push to zoom in for your character's eyes, so you can see out of their eyes, and then you can rotate.
Yeah, but you got to stop moving.
Right. Well, it definitely makes it so it's almost like you're pausing the game, even though everything else around you has not paused. So you don't want to do it in the middle of an action sequence. But generally, yes. There's definitely small rooms. There's a room later on that's like you go into a little beehive, and that's one where the camera basically doesn't move. It points one direction. And then you have to switch to your front view to see anything else in the room, and if you don't, you're going to miss things. And that's something that a lot of games that are 3D had fixed by this point, and this game did not. It was different to get used to it, but at least they had the option to do that. There was no point where if I couldn't look, through the regular camera, I couldn't switch to the first person mode and actually still see what was going on. But yes, it was not the best solution, but at least it was something. After Clanker's Cavern, which is the swimming level, which also teaches you how to be invincible with golden feathers, which is a less useful move than you'd think. You go through the swamp. I don't know if there's anything super notable about the swamp. I mean, I enjoyed it. It's just a good swamp level. You're not really supposed to touch the ground. You learn how to use the boots that let you run through fire or anything else that's kind of negative. You can find the right boots. The first level I had any real issues with was the next world, which is the ice world. Much like every game, the ice world is hard, but this one, at least, it's not because you're sliding around everywhere. The Frazizi Peak. This was a good level because it has a lot of different things you would do to earn the jigsaw puzzle pieces that were way different, but it's also the first world where, again, I don't know if I would have ever figured out how to find some of this stuff without looking it up online. There's a part of the game, or part of this level, where you see a little Christmas tree in the corner of the map. It's not little, but it's bigger than you are, but it's not massive. It's not like it's a Christmas tree that looks like you should walk into it by any means. And yet, in order to find one of the puzzle pieces, you need to climb up to the top of this tree after doing a series of other things. I did the other things you're supposed to do. I figured out what the other pieces of the puzzle to do were, and I could not figure out where that was. And eventually, I just got frustrated and ran at the tree and all of a sudden I warped into the tree, and you're like, it's like if you open a door into a shed and all of a sudden you're in a mansion. That's what this does, and it didn't make any sense to me at the time because it didn't look like there was anything you could actually walk into. You just kind of jump into a pot, and you're in a full tree. That was the first time I was like, okay, I've clearly got, I'm missing things because I'm not thinking dumb enough, I guess.
Well, it's weird because, I mean, before that, the game has already conditioned you to think that if it's a small area, then you need to change into that animal or insect or something like that. And that one is just totally like, well, no, just jump into this Christmas tree and you'll shrink down and you'll be magically small enough to climb inside the Christmas tree all the way up to the top. So that one was kind of weird, and I actually did that myself. I forgot what I did as a kid, and I was just like, well, what am I supposed to do here? I failed I did the thing that I needed to do before you jump into the Christmas tree to climb up to the top. What am I doing wrong? And I just totally forgot you just need to jump right in that fucking thing. And it even makes it more confusing since there is one of those change areas in that stage. So I was just, at first I was thinking like, oh, I just need to wait until I can do this and then jump into this Christmas tree. No, you just got to jump in that fucking thing. I mean, the game's rules aren't always consistent with itself, and that's one of the worst things about it.
Well, that one also has, and this is almost like the Clankers chain complaint you had, where you have to do it almost perfectly because you run out of time. Yeah. This level has the races. There's 2 races you have to do with against a walrus, I think he is, or a seal or something. And he makes, first time I actually think it was that bad. You have to turn into a little walrus at the Mumbo station, and then you'll go race him. That one I didn't find too bad. I thought that was okay. But later on, this is the only time in the game you have to go forward to then come back to do this puzzle. But after you go to the next area, which is the Gobi's Valley Desert area, you learn how to use the speed shoes. And you come back here, and you'll race him the second time as the bear with the speed shoes.
Yeah.
And that's one where it's literally, if you make one mistake, no matter how minute the mistake is, if you fall behind because you let up on the controller for a second or just try to figure out what you're doing with this terrible camera and the fact that you don't have the best of controls that you can see if you go over the side of a mountain or around a corner to see where these gates are, it becomes trial and error. It becomes that your only way you're going to get through this is to memorize exactly where to go at this point, and you have to do it in a perfect run. And that was one of the puzzle pieces I waited until, or the jiggies, that I waited until I was almost finished with the game to go back and do that second race. It was incredibly frustrating.
I could have done without this altogether. This was one of the other. This is probably, I didn't make it to the conclusion of this game. I am. When next time I get on to play, and I am going to finish it up. Next time I get on, I'll be there, pretty much for the final battle on there. This was probably the absolute most frustrating thing in this game. And to go back yet again, Mario 64, you race that damn penguin. And that was enjoyable, and it was forgiving. You could let that penguin get ahead of you. You could hit a wall. You could still pull it out. And there were a couple of shortcuts you could take. And you come back later on, that penguin, he's a fat ass now. He's put on about 300 pounds. You race him again, and he's a lot quicker, and, it's a lot more demanding. You can make maybe one mistake, but you can make a mistake. This is just, it demands perfection from you, but it just gives you the worst set of tools to work with. As far as, once again, that camera. The deck is stacked against you.
If you didn't get that far, so you got that far, but you didn't get through the whole game. So you get through Freezy Peak, which is the snow level, and there's the desert level, Gobi's Valley. I don't think there was anything too hard in that area. If anyone disagrees, speak up, but I think that was a pretty easy area. Mad Monster Mansion, loved that area. It's a a graveyard, and everything on it was pretty straightforward. Although that was one of the areas where I didn't know you could break the windows out in the house, because why would you think you could do that? It just looks like a window, and some windows are boarded up and some aren't. And it turns out any window that's not boarded up, that has the lights on, you can break it out. I found that out by mistake, just getting frustrated and just jumping at a window and breaking it. And then I thought, oh, okay, well, at least I figured this out kind of by accident, but still very frustrating. But I did love the level. I thought it was a good level. Did you get to play at all Rusty Bucket Bay, Billy?
Yes. And
myself?
And that is usually where I stop playing Banjo-Kazooie.
I made it to Rusty. I am in Rusty Bucket Bay, and this game, it takes a turn. You could have ended it right before this one, and I would have high praise. Even with the complaints, I would have high praise. This game, it just turns into a jerk eventually. It turns assy on you.
Yeah.
All of a sudden.
Rusty Bucket Bay is assy. That's a good way to put it. It takes all the things you've learned, and then it kind of makes it worse in every possible way. So first off, the water in the level, which is all around the boat. You're in a boat yard with one big boat in it, and most of the jiggies are somehow tied to this boat. But the water that surrounds the boat, that also has things in it you need to swim in and under, it speeds up twice your air meter, but also because it's oily sludge or whatever, even if your head's above water, you'll still be drowning, just at a slower rate than you would be if you were underwater. So if you accidentally fall in the water, or if you intentionally are in the water, you better know exactly where you're going as fast as you need to get there, or you're going to run out of air and die. And since half this game is exploration, that's incredibly assy. And there were things that were under the water that you needed to find that I don't know how you'd see. I mean, we all played this, I think, on the either the Rare Replay, or I'm playing it on the Xbox HD re-release. But on the N64, I don't know if the definition would have been strong enough for me to even see some of that stuff underneath the sludge that I'd need to find. There's an area of the level where if you fall in, there is a shark, but he's only in a small area, so that's another thing you have to worry about while you're trying not to die and drown, to dodge the shark that does damage to you. But it also has at least, I'm trying to think if there was three. Yeah, three. There are 3 different jiggies you have to find by doing time-sensitive tasks that are almost require perfection. Like you'll set a switch off, and then you better be on your way. And you have to deal with the fact they all have different reasons that make them difficult. So there's one that you have to push a button and then climb on this, not scaffolding, like a crane. You've climbed to the top of the crane, climb across the crane, and jump down onto the deck of the ship and roll underneath this cage that's been lifted up to get a jiggy. But the camera on that one is the first time that I honestly was like, I'm never going to get through this, because the camera is unbearable. You get to the top of the crane, and you're trying to run over, and it's on a small little area, so you have to make sure you're not running off the side of the crane, and the camera just kept basically like flipping out on me and like spinning at the wrong time, and I'd be running in a straight line, and all of a sudden I just run kind of in a circle off the side of it over and over again. Completely frustrating. But the worst one, and this was the last jiggy I earned right before I decided to actually finish the end of the game, there's inside the ship, there are a series of buttons you have to push. And to get to those buttons, you have to jump over these walk across these spinning, like crankshafts. And they stop spinning just long enough for you to get halfway across before they start up again. So you have to be halfway across and jump at the right moment to get to the other side of the platform that's not moving, or else it pushes you off into stuff that immediately kills you. So it's not even like you get a chance to swim back to a ladder and try again. No, you die, and then you go back to the beginning of the level, and you have to redo a bunch of little steps to get to where you're going in there to push the buttons. So you finally push the 2 buttons you need to push underneath the ship, and then all of a sudden it comes up with a 45-second clock. And you have to get back out of the ship, run through all these crankshafts again. Thankfully, they've stopped moving, but they're still narrow pathways that you have to deal with a bad camera or die instantly. And then get all the way to the front of the ship, and then deal with the fact that you have to use these terrible swimming controls to swim around underneath the ship to where the propellers are to get this puzzle piece before the propellers start spinning again because that's what the buttons stopped, was these propellers. Infuriating. I've never come closer in the last, since I've been an adult, to actually breaking a console than I was doing this one jiggy. I must have tried it 20 times before I just decided I wasn't going to do this ever again, and I'm not going to do it till it's the last piece of the game, and that's only if I have time. Otherwise, I'm just going to say I did it and move on.
Did you try shitting an egg on it?
I did, but it's underwater. You can't shit eggs underwater. That would be ridiculous, right? So you can't do that. But yeah, no, that's the hands down. I mean, of all, now that I've gotten all of the jiggies and did everything in the game, that is the worst section of the game was Rusty Bucket Bay, because there are so many time sensitive and control sensitive sections where the game just tries a little more than it can handle.
I think that, like I said, that's the stage where I generally stop playing Banjo-Kazooie, because as a kid I beat this game, and I loved it because it was great at the time. But when you're replaying Banjo-Kazooie, you really, once you hit Rusty Bucket Bay, that's the thing where it just becomes this perfect storm of everything that's wrong with this game. The weird kind of the nonsensical puzzles, the countdown timers for some of the stuff, and the terrible camera, combined with a stage that just, it looks awful. It is one of the worst looking stages in a 3D platformer I've ever seen. It just all comes together to give you this sense of, well, I don't think I need to play Banjo-Kazooie any further than this. And it works. I mean, that's every single time I come back to Banjo-Kazooie, no matter how much fun I'm having going through all of these levels. And up to this point, for me, I love Banjo-Kazooie. I can get through all of that shit we have talked about and complained about and love it. I don't care. It's just something that's part of the game for me. It's of its time. I can deal with it. But Rusty Bucket Bay is, it's hard to just get by that. It's you are really putting yourself through something special to continue on with Banjo-Kazooie. And unfortunately, I really can't say it gets much better from that.
Well, thankfully, after Rusty Bucket Bay, there's only one more actual world, which is the Click Clock Wood, which I actually thought was interesting. It's kind of the same map 4 times for the different seasons. You start out and only spring is unlocked. Well, you unlock spring from the main room, and then you go into the spring section, find a button that will open the summer section. Then you go to the summer section, and what makes it interesting is if you've done certain things in the spring section, for example, inexplicably, if you shit an egg into a hole in a field, a plant will grow. That's another place where if you shit an egg for no reason, that's the answer to the puzzle. But yeah, you shit an egg into this field, and a big tree, big plant grows, and if you come back in the summer, the plant is much bigger, and you have to find a way to water it. And if you do that in the summer, when you go to the fall, it's much bigger, and if you water it again, it actually gives you a puzzle piece. And then by the time you go to the winter level, it's dead on the ground. But it's a neat. I like that there are things you have to do in the earlier seasons that affect the later seasons. I thought that was very interesting. That said, it was also incredibly frustrating to try to figure out how to earn all the jiggies and find all the notes, because there were some things that, again, once you know the answer, it seems kind of obvious, but at the time, there's a lot of things that are either time sensitive or just they make it so if you don't know exactly what to do, you will either run out of air if you're swimming, or you won't know how to get to the platform you need to get to, or you'll do the right thing, but you're one season early, and for no reason it doesn't work in the summer. It only works in the fall, but it doesn't make sense season-wise, and the same person's there any time of year. So it definitely was an interesting mechanic. I did love the time change mechanic. I just, again, think it was not as polished as it needs to be. But that said, I think that even with the complaints I've had about the levels, all the worlds are, at least for one playthrough, well worth playing. On a second playthrough, I think by the time I got to the Rusty Bucket Bay area, maybe I would make the same decision Jeremy did and say, I've experienced what I need to experience for Banjo-Kazooie. But for one playthrough, even though it was frustrating and I hated the time-sensitive pieces of it, I still wanted to beat it. I still was enjoying it. I kept trying it. Once I did, I felt like I accomplished something. There's not many games that I feel like that about every kind of minor task, but this really does feel like you're accomplishing something every time you earn one of those quest jiggies.
We've talked a lot of shit about Banjo-Kazooie, but I still, it is a genuinely awesome Mario 64 style game. It is just a great 3D platformer. And if you can get by the control issues and the camera issues, I think you'll have a great time with this game. It's still really fun. But the one thing I really want to know, and this is kind of something that everyone has experienced that has beat Banjo 64, is and this is kind of, I want to ask Jeremy P. himself. You tell me about what you thought about that last boss fight.
I'm going to say the ending of the game it went from where I was actually really happy with the ending of the game, because before you get to what I believe you're referring to, which is the last actual boss fight, when you finish the levels and you get to the end, in order to save your sister, you go through Grunty's Furnace Fun, which is like a board game. And every square you stop on, you either answer a question about a game, a character you've met in the game, or it plays a bit of music, and it's like, what world is this from? Or it has a couple that are action challenges that I absolutely hated. But everything else in that puzzle, like that board game piece, even when I was losing, I was enjoying it. Like, I thought that was actually really interesting. It made it so, did you pay attention to the name of the squirrel you fed in that last level? And you're like, no, I didn't. I just knew it was the squirrel that wanted those nuts. Well, he has a name, and he told you his name, and you better have paid attention, because it's going to ask you that now. And that's also where all those facts about Gruntilda come up that her sister gave you. So it'll say, she'll say, what's my favorite color? And it'll list, dung brown, sickly yellow, sad green, or whatever it is. And you have to know the right color, or you lose a life point, or in some cases, immediately go to your death and start the whole puzzle over. I thought that was the ending to the game, because I didn't want to look ahead of time to see online what the end of the game was. So I got through the whole puzzle, and she gives you your sister back, and then it shows you some credits, and I was like, well, that was cool, that's great, I finished the game, but I didn't have at that point all the jiggies, so I knew I was missing something. So I went back and found the jiggies, and then I realized that there was another, when I got to that area again, instead of going to do the puzzle, because it doesn't make you do it again, you've already completed it, you now can go and run around through the area at the end of that board game section, and that's when I realized, there's another section of this game. I didn't really finish it yet. There's a final boss fight, and it is, I don't want to say it's bad, because I think it does take all the things you've used and makes you do them again in a very condensed format to beat Gruntilda at a final fight. It's 5 phases. The first phase is essentially just learning how to dodge, and using the things you would have learned in the first level. The second phase is Gruntilda is firing eggs at you, and you have to fire eggs back at her. That one wasn't so bad. The third section of the 5, you have to fly around and kind of hit her while she flies around. And the flying controls in the game, while they're very good for getting you to areas you haven't been, and they do feel like, if you don't know how to fly, as a bear, that this would be really cool, but it's not incredibly easy to control. Well, actually trying to hit a moving target while you're flying is awful. And that's the section of the last boss fight where, even though it wasn't hard, I wouldn't take a lot of damage, I might run out of feathers over and over and over and over again, and then have to restart the area because I ran out of feathers and fell to my death. Over and over and over again. And then, after you managed to hit her a bunch of times when she's flying, is what should be 2 easy sections where you just fire eggs into some statues, But instead, she's throwing fireballs at a pace you can't dodge. That part was awful. And I don't know if it's just that I'm not good at dodging these fireballs, but even on the playthrough I looked at online to make sure I wasn't just dumb and couldn't figure this out, it looked like the strategy is just soak up as much damage as you can and hopefully get enough eggs shot in before you die. Am I missing something there?
No, I that's it. I mean, you just have to fucking be real. It's kind of a combination of luck and just hoping you know getting through using the skills that you've learned. And I think overall, if that game would have ended like for real at that board game, I think it would just be so much better. But the fact that they added in that battle with after you've collected all the jiggies, I think it's a complete failure of just summing up that game. Because I think Donkey Kong 64 did it much better with its final boss battle. You have all of the Kongs facing off against, I forget his name, King Cruel or something. And each one has to do a very specific part of that game. Or a very specific part of that battle. And that is exactly what should have probably been. I think that's maybe what they learned from this game on up until to Donkey Kong 64. Because yeah, you're basically doing the same thing with this one. You're using all of the different abilities that you've learned to fight Gruntilda, and you were just... It's just not done well, I guess. And those are the two you mentioned are the worst offenders of the bunch. And it really just kind of comes down to feeling like luck whenever you do eventually beat that game. And it's even as a kid, I was just like, oh my God, just let this end. I just want to beat this game. I spent far too much time finding all of these stupid jiggies. I just want this to end at this point. And to have it play out like it does with those two sections, the flying section especially for me, it took me goddamn hours to finish that one as a kid. You know, I just... It doesn't seem like it was designed very well.
Well, it's a game that doesn't have bosses, and then all of a sudden you have a super boss. Like, there's no bosses in the levels generally. I mean, there are some fights you have to have. There's a crate you fight in that Rusty Bucket Bay or whatever, but that's still not really that bad. This feels like a boss fight, and it feels like one that you have to be extremely precise in a game that does not allow, because of the camera and also because of the weapons at your disposal, is not a precise fighter in any means. You know, you can't fly precisely. You can't shoot eggs very precisely. Even if you can shoot them in a straight line, you can't line that camera up fast enough. And meanwhile, while you're trying to do that, they're throwing fireballs at you at a level that you can't possibly dodge and do these other things. Everything takes too much time to make this as fast as it needs to be. But, you know, that said, I did it, and I'm glad I did it, and I felt really good when it was done. Because I did finish the game, and I felt like, as annoying as that was, at no point did I feel like it was not possible. It just felt like I wasn't tight enough on the controls. And there were a lot of times I died to cheapness, but I still felt like I had all the things I needed to do to finish this end boss. You know, I didn't have to go out and grind for anything. There wasn't a move I missed or anything else. I just needed to get better. And I like that. So... it was an annoying end, and I'll never ever do it again. But I do feel good that I did it. You know, I wouldn't have felt as good not beating Gruntilda and saying I finished the game. Even though I saw the levels, I got all the jiggies, I collected everything. If I wouldn't have beaten her at the end, I would not have beaten the game. So I'm glad I did that. That said, it was probably not the best boss fight.
It wasn't, and I just, you know, I feel like a lot of us we're being very negative on the game and everything because, you know, we're trying to play this now in current day. And a lot of the things we're complaining about, they weren't really complaints we could have had back when we were kids. And I remember as a kid just, you know, this was just, it was such an amazing game. It was so much fun all the way through. I loved finding all of the different, you know, the ways that you could find the jiggies, even though some of them were overly obtuse and not, you wouldn't have been able to figure them out if you didn't find some strategy guide or something at the grocery store magazine rack or something, but it was still really fun, and I loved the game all the way through, minus the parts that were just kind of overly, they're fucked up now by far. The camera and everything just doesn't hold up. Anybody that wants to play Banjo-Kazooie now, there's definitely parts that just doesn't work. But back then, if you played Banjo-Kazooie and you loved it, I can understand why there's so many people that genuinely think that this game is actually better than Mario 64. Personally, that's not me, but I still love this game. I love playing up to a point where the game just kind of maybe gets in the way of itself with the camera and the mechanics that it throws out at you, and it's still really fun. But I don't know. There's just a lot of problems with it now that really kind of prevents it from being as enjoyable as it was when I was a kid.
Yeah, and if I would have stuck it out and would have actually, rented this one or purchased it as a kid, I really would have enjoyed this game. And even at the time as a kid, the complaints I had, I wouldn't look back and say, oh, Mario 64 did this better, because I didn't look as far in depth in things back then. I was more focused on having fun, which unfortunately is hard to reproduce that kind of way of thinking nowadays when you're trying to hurry through a game, when you don't have all day after school to play or something like that. I think we've mostly had negative to say, but I can't take away from the fact that this is, at heart, it's a really great game. It's a lot of fun, and it's one of those games that its attempts at humor, if it's your type of humor, they really hit the nail on the head for me. And I thought it was a very funny game, very well written. It's just it's a good game, and we don't have those that often. So we have to appreciate it when we do. 25 episodes, I think. This may be one of and I'm going out on a limb here. I'm going to assume this is one of the few times we all can pretty strongly agree that we have played a very frustrating at times and pretty cheap on occasion, but a pretty good game.
I think it's a great game. I have to say, I complained about the things I didn't like about each level, but that was kind of to refine what where the issues were compared to what, if it would have been a, quote, perfect game. Mm-hmm. But in general, I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's a very pretty game, even now. It's it's not going to compare it to Uncharted 4 or something that's brand new, that's 3D, that's a much stronger system. But a lot of games from the early 3D era do not hold up. We talked about that with PlayStation previously. We played Jumping Flash. It moves really well, but it's a hideous game. This isn't hideous. It looks very nice. It's very clear most of the time what you need to do and where you need to go as far as to get through the level. There's nothing there were only a few times like that one cave where I couldn't figure out what to do, but everything else, the graphics still hold up fine. And the camera, as bad as we made it sound, there were only a couple times where it was honestly that bad. I think we're just spoiled by current cameras, but for the time, this would have been a more than acceptable camera for 3D games. Mario 64 would probably be one of the best cameras for that style of game, but I played Blasto. This is way better of a camera than half the PlayStation era 3D games. It's no Bubsy 3D, but it's pretty good. But no, I thought this was an excellent game. It has some faults, but I can't say. I had not played it before, so I did play it in 2016, and I was interested in finishing it. At no point did I feel like I was only playing it for this podcast. I would have played this regardless, and I would have enjoyed it. So this game did well enough that clearly that not only is it considered a classic, but it had a sequel on the N64 called Banjo-Tooie, which I think is more of the same, correct?
Yeah, it's generally more the same, but it kind of, a lot of fans really don't like it as much as the original Banjo because it just kind of went overboard with the collectibles. The stages were they were larger, but they weren't. There were a lot of extremely large stages like they were in this game, but a lot of it was sectioned off to very specific types of gameplay. Like you would get to a stage and you'd have to go to one section that kind of turned into a first-person shooter, or another part of the stage would turn into, you'd have to fly around. And it wasn't that you were flying around a giant stage all on its own. It was just that these parts were sectioned off into their own specific stages. And a lot of people didn't like that. I didn't like that myself. And if you thought the hub world in Banjo-Kazooie was hard to get around, then Banjo-Tooie will rock your world, because that fucking thing is a goddamn mess. Overall, to me, I didn't enjoy Banjo-Tooie anywhere near as much as the first Banjo-Kazooie. So I know there's a lot of people out there that really love Banjo-Tooie, but for me, it just seemed like it was trying to do a bit too much for what it was doing, and I never actually finished that game.
Well, then after that, I think there's a Game Boy port, a few other little games that were tied to the series, but not main series games. And then not until the Xbox 360 in 2008 put out Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which actually,
Holy shit.
That was the first Banjo-Kazooie game I'd ever played. I had never played a Banjo-Kazooie game before than just to see what it was, and I got a copy of Nuts and Bolts for free through something or other, and I did play that to the end. I didn't hate it, but it definitely... it's a weird game compared to this. I don't know exactly what they were aiming at. There are parts of it that play very much like Banjo-Kazooie, but generally most of that game is kind of like if you combine Banjo-Kazooie and Legos. Like you're supposed to build ships and boats and cars to race through levels. It's weird.
I've never had a game just beat my ass like that game. Oh, Jeremy and I got into, I think, a mini competition of sorts. I think we started playing around the same time, and just to see who could get the most jiggies in that. And it was a competition, and I don't think anybody won. I think we both just played so hard and focused on getting those jiggies so much that I think we stopped having fun. And and we both beat it, and I think we just kind of fizzled out. Every now and then, I will text him and mention, hey, we need to get on there and get all those jiggies. I don't think it's ever going to happen. We'll never review this game because it's much too old, or much too new rather. I've just a pro tip is just make a flat vehicle and put every engine on it. And there you go.
It was definitely a pretty game, though. I'll give it that. It did take the look of what the Banjo-Kazooie worlds looked like, and then really refine them for HD with the Xbox 360. But yeah, the actual mechanics of the game when you're just building ships and cars, totally different than this game. I did finish that. I did enjoy it, but it's kind of more of a weird offshoot, even though it's apparently one of the main games in the series. But then that's been it. There's been nothing else for Banjo-Kazooie. It was re-released on the Rare Replay collection earlier this year or late last year. I don't remember when it came out. But you guys have played it on that. The rest of that collection's pretty good. So I don't know if there are other Banjo-Kazooie games in the series directly, but there is a spiritual successor that's come out. Some of the people from Rare left, started their own company, and they're putting out a game that looks almost identical, but instead of a bear, you're some sort of lizard, I think, with another bat on your back, and that's called Yooka-Laylee. And that's supposed to be out later this year. But looking at screenshots of it, and I watched a little video, it looks exactly like this. I mean, not slightly like Banjo-Kazooie, but exactly like Banjo-Kazooie. And I think that's actually probably a really good thing. So I don't know if anyone else looked into that at all, but at least it's good to see that something else is coming from essentially the series.
Yeah, and a lot of people really seem to the Kickstarter itself got a ton of support. It was funded within a day or so, and I think a lot of people just really want some of those simple 3D platformers back. The idea of that style of game has really been lost on a lot of the stuff that comes out now. And even the Ratchet and Clank remake that came out for the PlayStation 4 last month, it sold amazingly well. It sold better than I think even up to the original PlayStation 2 releases when it first came out back then. And that's kind of unheard of. And I just think there's a lot of people that want that simple style of 3D platformer to come back, and you just don't get that kind of game anymore. So Yooka-Laylee seems like a return to what we loved with Banjo-Kazooie, and I can't wait to play it.
Yeah, as long as I can look up, I'm in.
Well, it'll be hard to imagine that they'll make a new game where you can't look up. But if so, I'll still give it a shot. And it also means that after 25 episodes, this might be the first time we've all agreed. Nah, actually, that's not true. But one of the first times in lately that we've all agreed a great game and one that people should definitely try. I think it holds up well even now, but definitely deserves the classic title that I give every game.
Yeah, Banjo-Kazooie is an all-time classic. You know, I think it's a legitimate 3D platformer that it holds up, you know, for the most part. I mean, we can bitch about the camera all we want and everything, but you couldn't do a camera any better back then. I mean, you could make it better now, but they really haven't. So what you get is, you know, what you see is what you get. And Banjo-Kazooie is that game, and I still think it's a great game to this day.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with this, even with the issues, and especially if you go in knowing ahead of time. You know, there are limitations just because of the time it was put out, but there's plenty to enjoy here. There is troubles aside, there is an excellent game waiting for you if you pick this one up to play.
So those are our thoughts on Banjo-Kazooie for the Nintendo 64. Next episode, our 26th episode, we're going to go to the PlayStation for Fighting Force. A game completely different from this, different style altogether, a brawler we haven't done in a while. Looking forward to that. But do we have any listener mail for our 25th episode extravaganza?
We do. We actually have a few, and the first two are kind of keeping in line with the type of game that we picked for our next episode. Trent 2001 writes in to ask, why do you guys pick games you generally hate? Bayou Billy comes to mind, and more recently, Ghoul Patrol was chosen even though it was already known that Jeremy didn't like the game. So why not focus on games you enjoy rather than the ones you hate? And then we also get a question in from an unnamed emailer that kind of goes along with it that asks, what exactly is your criteria for selecting games, since most of what we cover is fairly obscure at times?
I'll start. I think I think we don't, as a group, pick games that we know we hate. We all have kind of had input. We've all, you know, kind of had our individual picks, and it just so happens that I think each one of us is guilty. We lobby for games that we, for some reason, as an individual, absolutely love, but the group just doesn't seem to latch on to. My venerable mansion of hidden souls, General Chaos, anything Jeremy P picked.
Come on,
it's games that one of us loved, and we really want to go back and look at it and see if it still holds up, and we just want to see what other people or each other thinks of it. I don't think we. Maybe there's just one or two times going into an episode, all three of us knew surely this game was going to be awful. Bayou Billy, Jeremy P was genuinely excited for. I think we shuffled things around to fit in Bayou Billy. But yeah, I don't think we're hopeful that it's necessarily going to be a bad game. I mean, I think many times when I presented a game, I was hoping that it would end like this one with praise all around, but that just rarely happens. And I think I like the fact that we pick. I mean, if you want to look up, if you want to put in Super Mario Brothers 3 podcast, you're going to get countless. I think a lot of games out there have been talked about enough to the point to where there's not really anything new to say about it. There's not really any fresh perspectives to take on it after it's been talked about so much. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of games out there that are games that are good and bad that just don't seem to get much attention, or they've kind of fallen to the wayside because they weren't one of the big hits of the time. And you know, for all the bad ones we go through, I think it's always worth it when we dig up a hidden gem, and not hidden gem used sarcastically.
I don't think I've picked a game intentionally that I thought would be awful. I mean, Bayou Billy was the only exception to that statement, and I didn't pick it because I thought it was bad.
But you were so excited.
I look at this a couple different ways when I picked a game. Either I pick a game that I have a great memory of that I think is this a good game, or is this just, rose-colored glasses that I remember this game is so good? A great example is the Guardian Legend. Now, I still stand by that that's a good game. You guys did not enjoy this game, but I liked it. I enjoyed playing it. I finally got to finish this game for the purpose of the podcast. This is the kind of game I wanted to do this podcast for. A game that you're not going to find in a lot of other gaming podcasts. It might be a lesser-known hit, or a lesser-known failure. It doesn't matter. But a game that I remember that I enjoyed. In the case of Bayou-Billy, it was a game that I know we all played. It got a lot of press when it came out, and I remember it being really hard, and I wanted to go back now that it's a game that everyone has tried, everyone played. It's notoriously hard. Is it really a bad game, or is it that we weren't patient enough to get through it, or was it just bad marketing? What was it that made it so everybody wanted to play it? So there was a reason for that one. Not that I thought it would be bad. I was kind of hoping as I played it, it would click at some point. And I think this is why this game was always pushed so well. It's such a huge game, but no, it's a terrible game. Very frustrating, very poorly made brawler. But at least we did delve into it more. I enjoy going through a lot of these older games. So I don't normally pick games that I think are going to bomb. I just happen to like bad games, apparently. But Ghoul Patrol, as the other one that was mentioned as an example, I think was picked because it was bad. That was your pick, Jeremy, and I'd like to... was your goal just to make us play it because you knew it would suck, or were you kind of just not sure if it was a bad game or just one you didn't like, or what?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I knew I didn't like Ghoul Patrol, and sometimes picking these games it can be a little bit cathartic more than anything. To be able to bring this one out and be like, all right, I hate this game. What do you guys think? And to be able to sit there and bitch about a game that I genuinely felt ripped off about as a kid, because you're never going to get that chance again. You don't go out to friends and be like, hey, let me tell you how bad Ghoul Patrol is, because they genuinely, you won't have friends and you'll just be talking to yourself. But, for this podcast, it's been nice to kind of bring those games out and be like, hey, what did you guys think? Because even if I hated Ghoul Patrol, I would have been genuinely interested to know what, if you guys like Ghoul Patrol, why you liked it. Because, I don't set out to hate a game. If anyone loves a game and it's something that I don't like, I'm genuinely interested in why they like that game. I'm kind of jealous. Why can't I enjoy this game like someone else does? And if it's something that I don't get, there were definitely some of the podcasts like Toe Jam and Earl, there were games that I just didn't get, but I loved listening to other people, Billy and Jeremy P say, explain why they loved it. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. So that's one reason why I kind of pick these games that I don't like myself. It's just because I want to see what other people think about it. And if they hate it, then I kind of feel vindicated on hating it myself. But if they like it, then I kind of want to know why they like it.
So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. We don't pick games intentionally badly. We just pick games we think are at least interesting to talk about and haven't been talked about 1,000 times each.
All right, we have one more question. And these questions obviously are kind of geared more towards us in the podcast. We usually pick a game question to answer, but I figured for our year anniversary, we might as well pull these questions together and answer them while we got a chance. And Joe writes in asking, this is the only podcast I listen to where no one really talks about themselves. Over the course of the 10 or so shows I've listened to, all I really know about you guys is that Jeremy P will never own a PS4, Billy really likes an MC Hammer Tiger Electronics game, and the other Jeremy hates everything. Don't get me wrong, it's refreshing to not have to listen to 40 minutes of something about what you guys ate for your last meal, but it would be nice to know more about the people sitting behind the microphones. So I think basically he's asking why we don't talk about ourselves more.
I think, well, I mean, it's, and I think when we first started doing this, I think one of the things we wanted to get away from, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I mean, I listen to a lot of wrestling podcasts, video game podcasts, movie podcasts, and they all seem to have, like he said in the comment, the thing where you could pretty much skip the first, half hour or so, because people are just talking about, every mundane facet of their day-to-day life. And 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 maybe we're wrong. I'm just speaking for myself. I don't consider myself to be the most exciting person. I get up in the morning, I go to work. I don't make a lot of waves, so to speak. My Taco Bell order hadn't changed in like 2 years. I don't do anything exciting to speak of. And I mean, if that's something people want, if they want a tidbit every now and then, yeah, that's fine. But I mean, I think you walk a fine line between providing a little more information about yourself and kind of overtaking the podcast and making it something kind of boring and far removed from what the topic actually is.
Yeah, we had discussed that at the start of this not this podcast, but when we were discussing doing this podcast, we all kind of were on agreement that we didn't want to have one of the podcasts that and there's nothing wrong with that, but we want to talk about old games. That's why we're here, talk about classic games and playing them, what we think now. We didn't want to necessarily talk about even current news that often, and we've brought it up occasionally, but if you're going to go back and listen to old episodes of Retrovaniacs, you're not going to care what the news was 8 months ago about the upcoming Metal Gear Solid 5 or whatever it was the news at the time. That's no longer relevant. There's no point in talking about that. But also, this is about old games. No one wants to hear about me going to work and not hating not liking my job some days, or I had to buy a new car. Like, that's not interesting. If you are interested in what I specifically do outside of this podcast, I'm on another podcast that's pretty much exclusively about mundane garbage in my life and the other hosts' lives. Radio for Winners. It's on episode 170 or something now. But yeah, that's literally a podcast about nothing. I enjoy it. It's fun. I think it's funny, although who knows? But it's a lot more about my personal life than this is. But this is far more focused, and I like that about this podcast.
I think it's really important to stay structured in what you're presenting to an audience. And I know there's a lot of people that really love those those half-hour tirades of the random shit that happened in someone's week. But at the same time, this is it's a podcast, and at the very beginning of this, I think we like we've all said, we wanted to stay fairly on point with what we're talking about. And even like the games we're playing, at the beginning of the show, it's we try to stay brief with that. We don't generally talk about it too much. Every once in a while we will, but it's just kind of something we want to get out and have that little bit of information and move on to the thing that we're actually focusing on. And I think it's for me, growing older, maybe it's just something that the young kids enjoy these days. But for me, growing older, I want things to be brief. I want something to be to the point. I want it to be entertaining, and I want it to be just accessible and not have to sit through 2 hours of shit to get to that point.
Yeah, and we're not living much longer.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have time for this shit. We're getting on up in years. We're not ancient yet, but we have definitely sat through our meandering years enough to the point where this is we don't have time to sit around and talk about our Taco Bell choices. So I think that's just something that we chose by default not to do. In the future, who knows? Maybe we'll talk a little bit more. Maybe we'll just answer Mitomo questions on this podcast so that you can all know exactly what our favorite stupid shit is that Mitomo asks us. But as it is, I don't think we're generally not going to sit around and talk too much about our personal lives.
So, to get back to the point, back to games, next episode will be about Fighting Force on the PlayStation. It is available on the PlayStation Network if you're looking to play it ahead of time, but if not, just find yourself a copy of the PlayStation disc and go to town. Until then, please check us out on retrovania.net, send us an email, send us a question on Facebook, on Twitter. We'd love to answer them for listener questions, and thank you for listening to the last 25 episodes, which is 24 episodes since I was JP.
Yeah, before we get off here, I definitely want to thank everyone for listening to the podcast. For those of you that do, for the people that subscribe to us on the YouTube channel, and go to the site and read all our stuff. It's we do this stuff for fun, and it makes it even better that anyone else would actually enjoy this stuff. So definitely thank you for any sort of what you've done to listen to us or take in what we've done. So it means a lot to us, and I genuinely enjoy what we do. I hope you guys do as well.
Yeah, and the same for me. I'd like to thank everybody that's listened so far. And we don't take joy in much these days, but we
True.
take joy in communicating with you guys, whether it's over email, comments on the YouTube videos up there. And I'm very pleased to see it's a slow burn, but it's a growing community. Hopefully, we'll get up and running here. Yeah, and I'm surprised by the numbers seem to be increasing. I thought it was just going to be the three of us listening to it, and I was going to make my son feel real bad for me and have him listen to it every now and then. But no, we seem to have a nice set of listeners out there, and I sure do appreciate it, and hope we are here another 25.
Well, at least we'll be here for 26 for Fighting Force, and we'll see you guys next time.